Okay, here I am, back on my terrace. Today we are going to talk about the memoir My Salinger Year, written by Joanna Rakoff, published in 2014 by Knopf, although I read the 2015 Vintage Books edition. Why did I choose this memoir? Well, JD Salinger played a very important role in my literary life, I guess. It was through him that I first realized that I could be enthralled by a book, not because of the plot or the story, but because of the voice. Salinger's voice stands out, perhaps more than any other author that I've read in almost all of his books. First The Catcher in the Rye, then 9 Stories, then Franny and Zooey, then Raise High the Roof Beam Carpenters, and Seymour, an introduction. He also wrote a story, his last story. It was published in 1965 called Hapworth 16, 1924, which plays a role in this memoir. Salinger is special, and I'm not alone in thinking this. I'm sure a lot of you who are watching this video are fans of Salinger too. But he has, for the same reasons, he has this kind of uncanny ability to make you think that he knows you, to make you think that he understands you at the absolute depths of your personality. Also, there's a kind of sense that not only in the characters, but in the vision behind the characters, of absolutely no arrogance, of a kind of humility before the universe and the world in an attempt to understand it. And there's something about that attitude that makes you feel as though he, or this author, is going to find the answers and he's going to lead you to them. Another thing about him that's fascinating is that he published between 1948 and then 1965, and then basically dropped off the literary landscape. He moved to a small town in New Hampshire, never published again, supposedly continued writing every single day, refused to have his books turned into films, refused to have illustrations put on the covers of his book, refused to have his author photo on the jacket, refused interviews with the press, contended in court with any biographers. A purist, a man who totally believed, or seemed to totally believed, in the power of literature, that he wanted his stories to exist in this world only as books. He lived the life of a recluse until he died in 2010. So this adds to his legend, of course, as a purist, and it adds to the kind of sense of purity and seeking of truth that seems to be palpable in every one of his books. Anyway, the story of My Salinger Year. Joanna Rakoff decides to drop out of graduate school in London. She's 23 years old. It's a big life change moment for her. She also sort of leaves her boyfriend without really saying so, moves to New York City, wanting to write poetry rather than analyze it. And she wants to, get her foothold into the sort of New York City literary world. Through a temp agency, she gets a job at a literary agency, which is only known as the agency in the book. This agency, although it's 1996, has somehow managed to resist all technological change. She is working as like a glorified secretary, the bright young assistant, Girl Friday, she calls herself. She does everything on a typewriter with carbons. She uses a dictaphone, which has a headset and like pedals, so that she can type out the letters that her boss dictates to her earlier on a tape. And one day she discovers that this agency's star client is Jerry, which she discovers is JD Salinger, who she's never read. So this becomes one of the narrative threads, I think. you wonder, okay, this young woman who is trying to find herself in New York, trying to find herself in the literary world of New York, what's going to happen to her vision of literature and her vision of literary aspirations when she finally reads Salinger? Okay, what does she do well? Well, she does a really good job of describing New York and of giving it this kind of patina of nostalgia. And this is only, 25 years ago today, 1996, and when she wrote this book in 2014, it was just less than 20 years before. But so much had changed. So it's like a throwback in the best sense of the term. She writes well about New York in general. The book starts off extremely well. Perhaps other than in the, I guess, 11 reviews that I've done so far, perhaps only Gary Shteyngart, who wrote Little Failure, is as capable a writer as her. I mean, you get the sense that she could write extremely impressively well about nothing, able to, change styles on a dime. She also does a really, really good job describing clothes and decor. She manages to kind of nail character and scene by she'll talk about, how her boss wears, a fox stole or a whiskey mink, or she'll mention like a credenza. I don't even know what a credenza is, but it's like a whole room comes into focus when I hear the word, or a top-hued pantsuit. I mean, she's got a great eye for detail there and allows you to sort of envision the world how she does. She writes really, really well about reading Salinger when she finally does. I was moved in that section. It's about 3 or 4 or 5 pages, I think, when she finally reads Salinger and her kind of preconceived notions are shattered and she sees his literary worth. That's powerful. Also, a fascinating aspect of this story, which she does well, is one of her jobs at the agency is to read and to respond with form letters, although she doesn't always do it with form letters. The mail that Salinger receives, because he refuses to answer mail also. He's just given up. Mail comes from all over the world. These moving letters of how Salinger has tapped into their souls or into their deep, deep subconscious personality, revealing them to themselves. And she's kind of has this task of responding to these people because she feels for them. Reading it, I kind of wondered, like, what a fascinating book it would be if you could collect the best of these letters. That would be a fascinating book. And you wonder how the agency didn't somehow come up with this idea. Here's the thing about this book. It seems almost like a memoir written on spec. You could just imagine, like the marketing department of some publishing house just spooging at the idea, right? Like her outlining this book about how her exposure to Salinger, his physical persona, because she speaks to him on the phone and she actually meets him once in person, coupled with her first exposure to his work, forms her as a person, helps her come of age as a woman, right? That idea is just so good. And then you have this writer with such skill. Like, if anyone could pull this off, even if it's not really true, she could probably do it, but you get the sense that it's not really true. Like, and also, it's almost as though you get the sense that she wrote this book with the movie in mind. I mean, despite her shining prose, right, it is sometimes used to describe, for example, characters with this note of almost like Hollywood-esque hyperbole, where like she'll describe a character as like, I could imagine him eating neat peanut butter and jelly sandwiches sliced into triangles and wrapped into wax paper. I mean, that is not really like characterization in any deep sense, but you can see it being like an image in a Hollywood film. Or, you know, she lives in Williamsburg, which is a kind of a neighborhood at that time in Brooklyn, which was becoming gentrified. It was ethnic, it was Polish, but, you know, young artists were moving in because they could still find affordable rents. So a lot of her life outside of work takes place there. And so, you know, she's got these quirky roommates who are kind of too typical in a way. They're brittle young women with artistic aspirations who have been educated in well-regarded liberal arts colleges in the US, who have now come and set their sights on, you know, finding themselves in New York. You know, they have quirks like one roommate eats a pound of pasta in bed and then weeps in remorse afterwards and has a paraplegic cat. Another woman who has a kind of Jones for Vicodin has a whole separate room to her apartment for a pile of dirty laundry. When she finally gets the energy up, she brings it all to a cleaner's, you know. Also, her kind of boyfriend, at one point she says something like, he came into my life like a gale force, making me question all the small assumptions, that it was important to do one's taxes, to sleep 8 hours each night, and to fold one's sweaters in tissues. I mean, do you see what I mean? How skillful of a writer she is? She's so skillful, but it's like, it lacked soul. I mean, we never get to know this guy. There's nothing redeeming about him. Nothing redeeming about him. And so, you never, although this is a narrative thread, you're never wondering if this could work out, because you know it's doomed to fail. Look, you wonder why she's with him, right? But it's not as though people aren't with people who they obviously shouldn't be with. I mean, there's tons of people out there with people they shouldn't be with. But, you know, she's got to show us why. Like, what damaged part of her allowed her to be with this guy? Or is she exaggerating that he really had something going for him other than like a brilliant smile? I mean, that's the only redeeming characteristic that he has, according to her. Yet she, like, you know, goes out of her way to try to get one of the agents in the agency to represent his, like, dense, misogynist novel. I mean, at one point in this book, when she's talking about her preconceived notions about Salinger, she talks about how, you know, I think she says, I was interested in Pynchon, Amos, and Dos Passos. I was interested in Faulkner and Didion and Bowles. She liked writers with bleak, relentless styles. She didn't want, what did she say, like, she didn't want to read a writer who was insufferably cute or aggressively quirky, precious. These are the words that she uses, and yes, these are criticisms made about Salinger's work. She says she wants to read books that provoke, they don't entertain, right? Well, it's like I'm reading that and I'm thinking, like, you're describing yourself. You're not provoking me. You're entertaining me. And there's something about that that goes against the spirit of what Salinger represents about literature. I mean, he didn't write for Hollywood. He's not a cutesy writer. He does provoke. So it's almost as though she's writing the book that she wouldn't want to read. And so she reads Salinger. And the way she describes her preconceived notions falling away is really, really well done. But then it's like, it's like that memoir on spec idea comes back, because it's as though she's trying to show how having read Salinger helps her take the steps towards coming into her own as a woman. So it's as though it's so neatly and perfectly applied that it makes me question if it's real. If it just fits into some book proposal that she wrote. Don't necessarily trust my opinion, but there are a ton of people who love this book. It's obviously triumphed, but nonetheless, it seems to stand against the spirit of the man that she's supposedly commemorating.